Alright, Chapter 5, the integumentary system. What that means is basically just skin and everything that's in it. So the objectives for this chapter are to name the tissue types involved in your skin, the appendages, so things that are attached to it, and talk about the functions of the integumentary system. There's a lot more than you would think. And then what happens when things go wrong with the skin, so types of burns and types of cancers. So first of all, one thing I want to point out is in some texts the hypodermis is considered a layer, but it's really not. So let's look what I mean by that. On this picture, way down here, this fatty layer, the adipose tissue, these yellow dots, that's called the hypodermis. It's not really part of the skin. It's just what the skin's attached to. And then you'll notice that we have a really deep or thick dermis compared to a really thin epidermis, so just this little brown part of the top. Let's start with the epidermis. We know that it is stratified squamous epithelium. We saw that in Chapter 4. Most of its cells are keratinocytes, and then we have some melanocytes. The melanocytes are what determines your skin pigment or color, and they're what gets excited from sun exposure, which creates what is a tan or looking tanner. The dendritic cells are helping with your immune system, and then the really cool ones are the tactile cells, and that helps you feel things. So feel sharp versus dull, hot versus cold, soft versus sharp. You get the idea. Within the epidermis, there are several layers. So starting at the bottom, remember the basal part? We've mentioned that word before. And whenever you see basal, think basement. It's the bottom layer. It's the deepest layer, so it's the furthest away from the part that you're touching. This is where mitosis happens. If you remember the first chapter, mitosis is all about regenerating cells. Then we have the stratum spinosum, and that's where a lot of the keratinocytes, the melanin, dendritic cells are. And then stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum. This layer is only found in really thick parts, so the soles of your feet, the palms of your hand. And then the last one, this is probably the most important, the stratum corneum. It's a protective layer, and it's all dead cells. So that's the part that you're touching. Like if you're touching your skin, touch your arm, that is stratum corneum. Everything you're touching is dead. If we look at a really cool picture of this, this is a very blown up version of a skin. The outside is up here, so this is the part that you can touch. These are dead cells. The stratum corneum is this entire distance, so it's actually pretty thick. And then we have the stratum granulosum underneath, stratum spinosum under that, and remember the basement layer, the basal cell, that's down here at the very, very beginning. And then you'll see part of the dermis, which is our next topic. The dermis is very strong, flexible. It is a connective tissue, not epithelial, connective. And it has two layers within itself. The superficial papillary layer is all collagen and elastin fibers, so it's a little more flexible. The reticular layer is dense, irregular connective tissue. And another example of dense connective was tendons. So if you think of how tough a tendon is, that's how tough this reticular layer is. Let's take a look here. We've got a micrograph here. The very top is the epidermis, and then this pinker color is the dermis. Towards the top we have the papillary layer, and you can see how this looks almost kind of squishy. It's bendable and flexible. The reticular layer, it looks like a big ball of twine. So it's not very flexible, it's very, very firm and stiff. Alright, we have several things inside of your skin. One of them that you probably already know about is the sweat glands. Types of sweat glands are eccrine sweat glands, and apocrine sweat glands. Make sure you know the difference here, what is actually coming out of those glands. And then we have these last two. Ceruminous. Cerumen is earwax. So ceruminous sweat glands are only going to be found within your ear canal. And then mammary glands, this one seems maybe a little bit obvious, but mammary glands are only found in breast tissue or mammary tissue. Now another type of gland in your skin is sebaceous or an oil gland. So sweat glands is mostly water, sweat tissue. Sebaceous glands are for oil. And we need oil in our skin because if we didn't have that lubrication, the hair follicles would not be able to grow up and out. Alright, let's look at these two in a picture. So we notice that the sebaceous gland is this little guy over here, and it's attached to a hair follicle because we need the oil for the hair. Now a sweat gland is over on this side and is not attached to a hair follicle. It just by itself, and you'll notice that it has one little winding pore up towards the top that's not associated with hair. So if you were given a picture and you had to describe sebaceous versus sweat gland, note those two things. Is it attached to a hair follicle, or does it have its own little pore that reaches the surface of the skin? Right. Hair follicles, since we're talking about that, are flexible strands. They are dead keratinized cells. So that's why it never hurts when you cut your hair. They're already dead. The smooth muscles that are attached to them are really cool. They're called erector pili muscles, and that's what makes you feel like you have goosebumps. So when those erector pili muscles contract, it makes your hair stand on end. And sometimes that happens when you're scared, sometimes it happens when you're cold, but just really neat little muscles. Here's a picture of what that looks like. Here's that erector pili muscle. When it contracts, it makes that hair stand straight up. The next thing we're talking about is nails. These are made of keratin, which is very, very hard material. They're kind of like the scales that we have. You'll notice that the fold is where the nail is growing. Okay, so this lunule, this is where it's growing. The nail matrix is way back underneath that skin, and it grows out from that point. Alright, let's talk about functions. So the most obvious that you might think of is protection. You're protecting yourself from physical barriers that are outside, but also chemical barriers. So when you are secreting things from your body, so it could be through a sweat gland or otherwise, you are secreting things you don't need. And then the last one is a biological barrier. Your skin is protecting you from viruses, bacteria, anything from the outside world that could affect your health and your DNA. Another one is body temperature. So obviously when you're exercising, your core body temperature is going up and you start to sweat. When that sweat is released and it goes off of your body, it cools you down. But you can also prevent heat loss. And this one's a little less obvious. But if you're in a cold situation, you can actually constrict your capillaries so less blood is getting out to your limbs and more blood is staying in towards your core, and it keeps your core body temperature hotter. So this can only last for a certain point, and in Minnesota we know that it can be pretty cold in the winter. I wouldn't count on that for to replace your winter coat. A couple other things for the integumentary system or your skin is sensation. So we already mentioned touching and knowing the difference between sharp, cold, hot, dull, all of those. The metabolic function is due to the vitamin D. So you can take supplements of vitamin D in pill form, and that will be good to a certain extent, but your body needs a certain form of vitamin D, it's D3, that can only be metabolized through sunlight. So as much as you want to protect yourself with huge SPF during the summer months, it is good for your body to have some sun because it needs to metabolize the vitamin D in that way. The blood reservoir, this is kind of neat. When you are not exercising or not being active, your skin holds up to 5% of your entire blood supply. And you can just kind of keep it there until something else needs it. So if you're going for a run, all of that blood is now available for your muscles to use. Or let's say you had a big meal and now your digestive system needs more blood. the blood that's held in your skin can now go into those digestive organs. And then lastly, the waste secretion. That is one thing we already talked about with the sweat glands. All right, last thing, the imbalances of skin. There's 3 types of skin cancer. Basal cell is the most common. Squamous cell is a serious one because it metastasizes. That means that it goes from one place to another. So if you had skin cancer, it could jump to your lungs, or it could jump to your brain, or your ribs, or anything else. And then the last one here, melanoma, that's the one thing that if you had to have any of these cancers, you would not want that one. It's highly metastatic, and it is also resistant to chemotherapy, so your treatment options are limited. These are 3 examples. On the left, you'll see the basal cell. It's a small raised bump. The squamous cell has some discoloration, these darker spots within the big pink dot. And then melanoma is going to be much darker, and the size of the melanoma will vary quite a bit. Lastly, we have the types of burns. So burns are cell death. There's 3 classifications. These have changed a little bit depending on what textbook you're reading, but for now we'll just call it 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree burns. The 1st degree is damage to the top layer, just the epidermis, so that'd be like a sunburn. The 2nd degree is affecting all of the epidermis and just the upper dermis, and the 3rd degree is the entire thickness. This next picture is not the most pleasant, but we'll take a look. Here is a 1st degree burn, just some redness up top. 2nd degree involves a blister. And 3rd degree, you're looking all the way through the entire thickness of the epidermis and dermis. So if you have any questions about Chapter 5, feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, thanks for watching.